So God invites us to take part in His grand story, His story to bring the whole world to Himself. So when we first arrived to New Guinea, we were excited. We couldn't wait to bring the message of the gospel to a tribal group. The Lord directed us to the Hewa tribe.
We moved into Hewa to start learning their language and culture, and we moved in with Jonathan and Susan Koff.
Faimpat. I'm going to talk about Faimpat. I always liked that kid.
When I was a young boy, I lived at Ima with my father, his brother Was, and a few other relatives. My father died, so I don't know much of his practices and beliefs. My uncle Was heard that Jonathan and Keith, with their families, had moved to Fiavana and said, "Let's go there." I saw the outsiders and thought, their skins are completely different from our skins. I was shocked and scared.
When I first got to Fiavana and was clearing ground in order to build my house, he was helpful. He was just a nice little kid. He wasn't very big back then.
And later I saw that they were working to build an airstrip, and we worked together there until it was finished in 2004. Then they started a literacy school, and the first group learned how to read and write, but I didn't understand what it was all about.
I used to think, I can't wait till he hears the gospel message. As time went on and we were learning the language well, he became a friend of Micah and would hang out with Micah. They'd play together.
I was still a small boy when the witch doctor called for me to come. I didn't think it was very important, but Uncle Was said, "You need to hike over to Aesop and live with the witch doctor."
Yanis, his cousin, Yanis was helping me learn the language, and then when we got the language well enough, then Yanis and Ayaka, they started helping me with translating. We were translating the first verses of the Bible, Genesis, and we're working through getting ready, getting enough verses translated so that we'd be able to present the gospel story. And I remember I would talk to the boys like Faimpat and say, get ready, make sure you're here, make sure everything is, you don't have any distractions, because we're just about to teach the most important message you have ever heard. You've never heard a story like this, you need to come and hear it.
I did not understand why Jonathan and Keith had come. Was it so we could eat rice and noodles, or get flashlights, and build nice tin-roofed houses?
So Faimpat was part of the group that seemed agreeable. It seemed like everything was going fine until we made that announcement the day we were going to start teaching. Then I heard through the grapevine that the local witch doctor, one of the many witch doctors, had made a similar announcement. He said, "Okay, everybody, all the young men of the village, June 12, I want you all to come help me. We're going to build a huge house. And I'm going to start teaching the ways of the ancestors, the ways of appeasing spirits. And so I want all the young men to come help me build my big house."
I was getting bigger when I left Fiavana to go to Aesop and live with the witch doctor and many other young men. We watched how he did things. He told us to build a house, a very large house with a pole frame and exterior sticks lashed on with vines. Inside the walls had strips of bark and bamboo flooring. When the house was completed, the witch doctor said, "Now it's time to teach about the spirits of the ancestors. But first, you need to hike through the jungle, setting vine traps to catch wild animals and prepare for the spirit training."
So I went and talked to the witch doctor, and he was saying, "Well, this is a new story. Yes, it's our ancestral story, but we are building a fence. We're building this huge fence that's going to protect all of us." He's talking about a spiritual fence to keep all evil spirits away outside of Hewa territory. No one will ever die again. No one will ever die again. He's talking about eternal life here. He said enemies won't be able to attack us and have any advantage over us again. He said our gardens will always grow good. There won't be droughts. There won't be problems. We will always have game in our traps. And we'll always have plenty of food when the boys go hunting.
Later, when checking a trap, I found a huge pig already dead. I burned off its hide and carried it back to the house for all to eat. But then I felt a very sharp pain in my shoulder. It was hurting very bad. The pain got worse and worse, and I just lay on the floor for weeks. My arm became very skinny while the other arm was still normal. My shoulder was ruined.
So I talked some more with him that night, and that night I just prayed, and I thought, in the morning when I get up and I head back to Fiawana, to the village where we had built our houses and we're going to present the Bible, I prayed, I said, God, that these young men that are right here in this big house right here, these young men like Faimpat, God, that you would just make them hungry for your word, that they'd want to hear it and that they'd come with me and Micah as we go back to our village.
So my shoulder was ruined with the bones poking up under my skin. I was thinking I was near death. Maybe I should go back to Fiawana to take medicine.
I met with Keith and we prayed about it and we decided, you know what, let's go ahead and start teaching and hope that God will bring the young men back from the village so they'll hear the Word of God. So we started teaching in June.
Susan had been training men like Kelepi and Martin to administer medicines. I asked Kelepi to help me. Sorry, I'm near death and think I should take medicine. I was there drinking medicine for 3 Saturdays and I recovered and the pain stopped. I thought, should I return to the witch doctor at Aesop or should I quit the spirit training? But then the witch doctor arrived and said, I have come to take you back. Has your pain stopped or are you still in pain? I'm a little okay, but in a little pain. Okay then, you come back with me, he said.
So we started teaching in June and taught through July, August, September. It wasn't until October. Got toward the end there, wrapped it all up, taught the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Faimpat hadn't come to any of it, not any of it. Some people had listened, and it looked like some people were trusting in Jesus. Later things went into a meltdown there in that village.
I heard back in Fiawana someone hacked Thomas to death. He has been chopped to death and all the men at Fiawana have gone crazy.
I went down and held my friend who had been killed, and his blood got on my hands, and I just cried to God, what is this all about?
So I hiked there to see. But I was still following the customs the witch doctor had taught us, that while we were participating in the spirit training, we were forbidden to be seen by women. I was trying to find my Uncle Vos, as he also was being hunted to be killed. I found him right in the middle of the village with Michael. Lots of men with guns had come searching for them and were closing in on my uncle. One of the men jammed his gun into his chest and pulled the trigger, but it didn't go off. They yelled, "You and your relatives get out of here now."
After somebody got sick, after somebody died, they would sit around in the evenings when we weren't there, but they would decide who was guilty, who had the evil spirit that was causing sickness and death. And then they formed raiding parties and went and killed one young man, and later more. And it just tore at our hearts. We're here to save lives. We're here to give them the most awesome message they could ever hear.
Since Thomas had been killed, all of Vos's relatives had to leave. And with that, they left. I saw that my uncle was not terrified, but seemed to be calm. I came out of hiding and stayed with him for a couple of days. But then, we received news. Felon's mother died at Aesop. I was very sad and thought, but wait, the witch doctor had said, we are building a huge fence so no one will die. But now someone has died. What's the reason? I left Fiawana to return to Aesop, and sure enough, they had put her dead body in the little hut we had been using to cook food. I saw it and wailed in grief. Later, we buried her body. The witch doctor said, her death is not something to be concerned about. It's just a little thing. Other people won't die, just her. Then he said, you men go search for gold and continue to set traps to catch game. We dug holes on every mountain and searched for gold around every spring and creek. We searched on and on and on, and eventually returned to the witch doctor's house and said, what are we supposed to do? He said, it's nothing to be concerned about. It's nothing. You just keep searching for the source of the gold. And so we searched on and on and on, but didn't find any gold at all. I thought, if he was a true man speaking the truth, we would have discovered gold, but we haven't seen any gold. What's the reason? I was confused. So we left the spirit house without keeping death away, nor finding any gold at all. Some men had made spirit drums and were beating them in big dances to satisfy spirits.
Eventually, I had somebody tell me they were just all excited about beating their drums in order for all the spirits to be in harmony so that their lives would be beautiful, magical, perfect here on earth. That murder in our yard put the village in war. We were not able to live there anymore. I had to take my family, wife and kids out of the village. Keith also couldn't live there with his family. We had to live in town. I wanted to do what I could to reach these people. We had told them the gospel message, but didn't know how to live there because it wasn't safe anymore. There was continual talk of retaliation and
During one of the spirit dance parties, the witch doctor said the evil spirit that ate Felon's mother, causing her death, was an evil spirit that lived in the woman Lut. And saying that, he jumped up with a spear, thrusting it back and forth in the air as if motioning the act of killing Lut. They caused Felon's mothers to get sick and die, so we need to go kill them.
And we found out that they had this practice of killing women and children to try to exterminate the evil, the most evil spirits that were supposedly in these women and children.
Very soon after they killed Lut to get rid of evil spirits, another woman, Defiyako, got sick and died. She had been flown out to Vivek Hospital, but they sent her back to the village to die, saying she was suffering late stages of cancer. I saw that she died and was shocked. The witch doctor told us we would no longer die and we had killed everyone possessed by spirits who were causing deaths. But now, another person has died. What's happening? I didn't understand. I was so confused while living there at Aesop.
What is going on? And we didn't know what to do, but we prayed, God, that you would find a place for us to live. And then one day, my friend Yanni said to me, how about my grandfather, my grandmother's brother? How about his village? Why don't we go there? Because he's been asking for the gospel.
The man Jonathan and Yanis came to Aesop. They were hiking from Fiavana all the way to Kulufundu. I asked Yanis, why are you doing this difficult hike? We are going to see the people of Kulufundu. Alimbu and Fato told us they were hungry for God's words, so we are going to see what it's like there. They had brought 2 packets of noodles, so we cooked them with greens and ate them together. In the morning, they said, help us carry our bags on this hike. So I carried 1 bag and Matiyu carried another, and we hiked to Kulufundu.
So we made the 2-day hike, and oh man, the scenario was completely different.
The villagers were low on food and very hungry. Alimbu, Fato, and Samuel were almost too hungry to eat. My mother Fiza was there. She had escaped from Fiavana at the time when Thomas was murdered and fled with her elderly mother to live with Alimbu at Kulufundu. Alimbu showed Jonathan where he would sleep in the entryway of his new house.
The patriarch of the village, an old man, and his son Fado, and the others there welcomed us and said, we want you to teach us. We want you to teach us right away. Don't wait. And don't bring any of that rice. Don't bring anything else with you, because we don't want enemies to see that and follow you here. We don't want people coming here for any other reason but to hear the gospel.
I saw what was happening, and later I helped Jonathan carry his backpack when he hiked back to Fiavana. Later in 2008, I heard that they were starting a school to teach people how to read and write there in Kulufundu. Fato built a house for Jonathan and Susan to live in, and another house for Yanis. A few times I hiked back and forth to Kulufundu to bring sweet potatoes because I knew Yanis was hungry. I heard there was going to be a party when Yanis's house was finished, so I shot a very large wild pig and brought it for the party.
So Yanni started teaching literacy class to teach a group how to read and write, and that went really well.
Then when Yanis finished teaching school, the students would receive certificates. I asked what the certificates were for. It was so the students could do God's work.
Right after we had taught the law, before we got into the life of Jesus, Faimpat showed up.
I saw what was happening, and even though I hadn't attended many classes, I started trying to learn to read. Yanis helped me with the first lesson book. I caught on to reading the syllables, and I was quickly able to read the first book, then the second, and the third book. But Susan and Yanis were in shock that I had learned to read so quickly. They said, "If that's the case, then you are ready to read God's book."
He started attending our teaching sessions there. He caught up with the others. He hadn't attended the literacy class, but he caught up with everybody else. Just self-taught and had Yannis help him and some of the other boys help him. Learned how to read and write by the time of the first graduation class.
That's when I started to think back on my life. It dawned on me, God must have caused it to happen so that I could learn to read so fast. That's when I reversed my thinking and decided not to return to ASAP and started coming to hear the teaching. I listened day after day until Jonathan reached the death of Jesus and how he returned to life. And then he taught the Creation to Christ course a second time. When he got to teaching how Jesus died on the cross, he had Ken up on the cross acting out how Jesus died. I was very surprised and overcome by what I was seeing. It's true that he was killed. I saw it and it left me in shock. I thought I had worked very hard for the witch doctor. I could have died and I gained nothing from it. But now for the first time I realized God made me. And up until now, I haven't been good in God's eyes. I am not right at all. I have put a lot of effort into searching for gold. I have been in a group that decides which women are spirit possessed, and we told people to go kill them. I realized I was very guilty in God's eyes. Jonathan showed a video about how Jesus died on the cross. I saw it and was in shock. Jesus had been thinking of all the bad practices I had been living in the past, all the wrong things I was doing now, and even the bad things I will do in the future. And in order to pay for those things, he suffered much pain. I realized that if I didn't turn away from my sins to trust in Jesus, later he would say to me, "I suffered much pain while dying for your debt of sins, so why didn't you trust in my payment?" And God would say to me, "I gave my only son to die to pay your debt of sins. I looked into the future to this time and did that for you. So why didn't you think of all those sins?" I realized he would send me to the place of fire as punishment.
We taught the life of Jesus and he just soaked it up. We got to the death, burial, and resurrection, and he understood. He was one of the very first people that understood that Jesus died for a reason, to pay for the sin debt of all people. And he got it.
At that very time, I was born again to become one of God's children. I decided to reject all that I had learned from the ancestors and all I had learned from the witch doctor, and yet never found the source of life. I had searched hard for gold, but never found it.
And he says, I want to be a follower of Jesus. I want to be devoted to God. I want to follow his trail. I was so excited, so pleased. Him and these other guys, Fado and Alimbu and Michael, and they were just so excited to hear this message, to understand it. And they said to me, "Jonathan, you can't leave. You've told us the beginning of the story. You've told us it's like building a house. You've driven poles into the ground to build this big house, but we need to hear the whole story. So you can't leave. Don't go anywhere else. Stay here and teach us." And I asked Faimpat, I said, "What are you thinking? Are you going to be here?" And he said, "Yes, I'm not going anywhere. I need to hear the rest of the story."
I had a new chance. God caused it to happen so that I could live at Kulafundo and become one of God's children. I hadn't gone to school to learn to read and write, but God caused it to happen so that I could hear about the death of Jesus for my sins. God worked inside my heart and I became a son of God. I am so very happy that happened, and I just kept living there. I just listened as Jonathan taught God's words.
So then we continued teaching all of Acts, the story of the early believers, into Romans, foundational truths of the Bible, about halfway through Ephesians, and that's where Keith came in and helped teach Ephesians.
All these ideas were new to me, but I started telling others about God's words in His book and Jesus, the only thing of significance. I told lots of stories about God in order for my uncle and his wife to hear. Whenever Yanis left Kulufundu to take trips to other places like Fiavana, I took his place in teaching God's word to the other people. The people of Kulufundu had taken on a good understanding of the power of God and strength of Jesus, and we were living as children of God, taking on His way of thinking. But I kept thinking about the people that were still living at the witch doctor's village of Aesop.
Our time was up, so we went to the States on furlough to do our home assignment. While we were gone, Faimpat and Yanis and these other guys, Gifson and Michael, they all got together and they started praying and considering the people that lived in the witch doctor's village of Aesop. And so as they were praying about it, they felt like the most natural person to go back to Aesop and teach the Bible to the witch doctor's village was Faimpat. By that time, the village had migrated from that original garden area to another garden area they were calling Pasife.
I went to Pasife carrying a box with all the books for teaching them how to read and write. They had built a roof shelter to use for our teaching house, so I hung the blackboard there and started teaching. Everyone was coming to school, and by the end, there were about 20 men and women who had learned to read and write very well. Then we started teaching Genesis. Yanis came to help me start and was there for about a week before he returned to Kulufundu. While I stayed there teaching, nothing bad happened at all. Everything went well. I continued teaching until the first Creation Through Christ course was finished. Then I went back to teach through it again for the second course until it was finished. Then I showed the illustration of how Jesus died on a cross. The people saw the skit and all of them started crying and wailing and asking, "So now what should we do?" Then I started checking to see what they understood, and I realized that some of them understood the significance of what Jesus did on the cross, but others did not. But they really wanted to get baptized, and I was not sure what to do.
Like, God, you have done something beautiful here. You took somebody out of the witch doctor's training, turned him around and sent him back into the witch doctor's training, and some of those very people have repented and turned to you.
Jonathan had returned, so Yanis and a few others who were ready to be baptized from Kulufundu came over for the baptism.
But we got to watch as Faimpat and Yanis baptized Faimpat's uncle that raised him, Yanis' dad, right there in that village, baptized their own father and uncle. And what a joy, what a joy.
After the baptism, I stayed there in Pasife to teach them God's words, because that's what the Bible says do in Matthew 28. Baptize them and teach them to follow Jesus. I stayed on at Pasife teaching until 2011. When I came back to Kulufundu, they had come up with a new plan. They wanted to build an airstrip to get books and paper and pencils and medicines and soap because the helicopter cost too much money. Later, I heard that they had found a suitable place down at Yifki. I went back to Pasife and let everyone know that I was going to be living at Yifki to help build the airstrip. But first, I did my best to teach them everything they would need to know so that they would be ready to take care of themselves spiritually after my departure.
Eventually, when we decided to move here to an area that they called Yifki to build a village and an airstrip, Faimpat came with us. He was eager to help us. So he was one of the young men that supported us in building the airstrip, building our houses, and he built a house here. And he was so eager to take in more of the teaching that he didn't want to go back to Pasife because he felt he might miss something. So as we were teaching 1 Corinthians and Timothy and Philippians and these other books, as we kept teaching the Bible, he has been part of this village, absorbing it, taking it in the entire time.
We were a small group with very few men, so we divided up the airstrip, assigning 5 men to clear the top, 5 to clear the bottom, and 5 to clear the center, assigning all the boys to help. First we cleared out all the underbrush, then dug out the root balls of all the trees until they fell over. Jonathan was cutting logs with the chainsaw, and he worked hard to teach us how to use the saw. So Fato, Yanis, Ken and I cut up all the logs and everyone worked to burn all the logs, branches and roots. Then a tractor came and Jonathan and John Michael started leveling the ground. We were working very hard, but there were no broken bones or accidents that caused death. I saw that and thought, God is powerful. The entire airstrip was done very quickly. Jonathan and John Michael worked hard and it was very quickly leveled. We were so happy and we said big prayers of thanksgiving. God, we have seen your very big strength, and all the people were thankful and saying thank you to God. We had started the work in late 2011 and an airplane landed August 2013. Only a little over 1 year and the project was completed. We all gave the airstrip to God and we declared, we will be devoted to Jesus and follow his words completely. We were teaching the trail of Jesus, saying, follow this way and stay away from that way. But some of our kids were not taking it in. Their thinking was soft. Their thinking about girlfriends and boyfriends was of huge significance. They decided to reject the message and were following the practice of immorality. Again, about that time, a big sickness swept in called measles. All the people were very sick and nearly dying. I was taking care of people. We brought some of the sickest people into our church so that Susan could care for them there. But during that time of terrible sickness, no one died. No one was put in a grave. God saved our lives and gave us life. And we were so surprised and were saying, God is alive. My heart's thinking became very strong. God, thank you. You are alive. Thank you. Now we have seen your power. While living at Ifki, I kept thinking of those people living back in Pasiphae and wondering if I should go back to teach them more of the Bible. But we heard news of boys stealing girls. I said to them, watch out, God's strength is very big. So if you are fooling around in sin, you are going to see an example of God's power. Watch out, like how he cleaned off the earth with water during Noah's life. And how God caused a terrible thing to happen by allowing Thomas to be murdered in Fiavana to get them to repent, and he may do the same thing here. Watch out. Don't live like the dogs and pigs who have no reasoning and have no ability to control themselves. Watch out. That was another time where we saw God's very big power to protect us. He kept us from being destroyed, and we are living well here. God's strength is very big.
We started teaching a discipleship course with the purpose of being able to have the village choose their own elders and deacons.
About 5:30 in the morning, it was before the sun had come up, I heard somebody outside my house, and they were walking around and they were kind of muttering and mumbling, and I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. I walked out and there was this gentleman named Faimpat. I walked up to him and I said, Faimpat, what are you doing? What's going on? He said, every morning I get up and I walk through the village and I walk around each house and I pray for each individual within that house. I pray for their safety, for their health, but most of all I pray for their spiritual understanding and for their spiritual growth. And he's like, I even walked around your house this morning, was praying for you. And here is this young man hungry to serve in his community, hungry to pray for his community, hungry to see not only physically okay, but most importantly, spiritually okay. And that is one of the reasons it was an easy question. Does he meet the qualifications of an elder? And as we look through that list, you could see Faimpat definitely has a heart and a care for the sheep in Hewa.
Faimpat was one of those guys, one of the sharpest, one of the most discerning, one of the most apt to teach, able to teach. And one who had kept himself pure so that he could serve God. Faimpat is one of those guys. He's a hero of faith here.
One of the bittersweet parts of the work is you work so hard, you pour so much into it, but you're doing all that to work yourself out of a job. The Hewa or whatever group you work with, they'll always be able to reach their people better than an outsider can. They know the culture, the language, the ins and outs. They know it all better than we ever will. And so yeah, it's time to put it into their hands. We have strong church leaders, and it's time to let them stand on their own 2 feet.
So as we've been living with the Hewa, I've got some young men that have helped me translate the Bible. But as we translate the Bible, I need at least 3 guys to go through every single verse to make sure I'm saying it as clear as possible in their language. So Faimpat is one of those guys that helps us in the consultant review process. It's an exciting story. It's unfolding as we speak. It just starts, it's opening up. It's a beautiful story that God has invited us to participate in. And I am so proud to be a friend of Faimpat because I see God has worked powerfully in his heart and using him to bring the gospel message to other villages inside the Hewa language area.
I'm waiting to see where God will decide for me to go. Only He holds that in His thinking. Doing God's work is of huge significance.